Hi everyone and welcome back to SwitchUp, and as promised, here is our review of Pikmin 1 and 2, the double pack collection on the Nintendo Switch. As you'd expect, Glen has played these so many times, he could review them quite literally with his eyes closed, and I've gone over the performance, we've looked at docked and handheld, we've got frame rates for you, as well as a comparison to the Wii and the GameCube versions. If this type of video helps you at all, please do hit all the buttons, consider sticking around, and you can also save yourself some money on the eShop by buying your eShop vouchers over at switchup.gg using code SwitchUp. Are these games timeless treasures to be found, or relics best left in the past? Well, my name is Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp. Now let's find out. Both titles are running at 1080p when you're playing in docked mode and 720p in handheld. Unlike their predecessors, they're now running in full widescreen. Thankfully, this doesn't stretch everything out, and it seems like Nintendo have done a little bit of work when it comes to making it look just right. The visual quality itself, well, it hasn't seen a huge amount of change, although I did notice a few slight tweaks. Firstly, when we look at the textures, they perhaps haven't aged as well as some of the other aspects. There are a few little changes. You might notice the Duracell battery at the start of the second game has now been replaced with, well, this one. As far as the textures go though, these look almost identical. Perhaps the up-res does make them look slightly sharper, but I think it also highlights their age, especially when you zoom right in. The resolution increase improves the character models across the board simply by having more polygons. I did notice a huge amount of aliasing on the edges of objects, and I was quite surprised actually to see that the original Wii version of the sequel looked as good as it did. The environments do show their age. Some of the geometry is slightly blocky, but destructible scenery definitely looks improved, even if again that is just simply an upscale. I was interested to see if these were more of a Metroid Prime remaster or if they simply focus on the upscale and the widescreen, and I do think it's perhaps the latter. It's not to say they look bad at all though, and actually have aged quite nicely. When playing in handheld, it's a very similar experience, but again you get a lot more real estate having that wide screen. One of the first things we checked were the controls. Now while these remain relatively the same, there's no touchscreen, there is gyro control implementation, which is really useful for using that pointer-like movement and selecting Pikmin while still controlling with the left stick. Added into the mix is also a tweaked HD rumble, which gives the whole thing a nice tactile feel. Load times are almost non-existent, as you'd hope, and there are auto saves at regular intervals. Before we look at frame rates, let's just jump over to handheld mode, and as mentioned, it's another example where squashing everything down to that small screen can make it look significantly better. You don't notice quite so much the slightly janky geometry, and it does run smoothly enough, as you can see. If you're jumping into them for the first time, it's definitely a viable option with large text size and no real drawback. Then on the frame rate side, I was expecting 60 frames per second, I have to say. It looks like the menus run at 60, but in-game you're looking at 30 frames per second across both titles. With that said, frame pacing is excellent in both, and I didn't notice any drops or stutters. While 60 is always preferable in my book, it isn't a game requiring fast reaction times, and the gyro didn't seem negatively hindered by the 30 FPS frame rate. Sound and music has always been excellent in the series, and this seems to have carried across nicely. The audio quality is of a decent standard. I didn't notice a huge amount of compression, and the soundtrack is as good as ever. Some of the noises the Pikmin make, they're a little more irritating, but there's also decent ambient sound in here. So as far as the visuals and performance go, well, it's a HD remaster, exactly like it says on the tin, has gyro and runs at 30 FPS. As for gameplay and controls, well, Glen's here to tell you all about it.
So gameplay wise then, both Pikmin 1 and 2 have a very similar premise. You play from a third person perspective, controlling Captain Olimar, and using the titular Pikmin characters to assist him in his quest for that particular game. Each of the Pikmin characters has a particular skill set that will be useful in certain situations, or you can just use them to carry certain items that are too heavy for Olimar to carry by himself. Let's have a more in-depth look at the first game though, and this game had you crash landing on a planet, and Olimar's goal was to find all of the pieces of his ship so he could get back to his homeland. Now this game had a 30-day cycle. You had to find the pieces to your ship within 30 in-game days, otherwise it was game over. Whilst this is a fantastic game still, this particular mechanic does feel quite antiquated now. felt quite antiquated at the time, to be perfectly honest, and it is a shame that it was locked into that time limit. Now, I do still love this first game, but it's just something to bear in mind. If you're only going to buy one of them, it may hamper your enjoyment. This game has the three main Pikmin characters being red, blue and yellow. Red Pikmin being able to withstand fire, blue Pikmin being able to swim, or at least walk in water, and yellow Pikmin could jump the highest and could also carry bombs in the first game, and in the second game, whilst they lost that ability, they were able to survive an electric current. You'll need to solve environmental puzzles using the Pikmin characters and their special abilities to find the aforementioned ship parts in each of the sections of the world you find yourself in. Pikmin 2 was one of those rare cases of a sequel that actually improved on its predecessor. It did away with the 30-day limit, giving you unlimited days to reach your goal, which this time was to find as many treasures to try and pay off the company's debts after they crash and lose a very precious cargo. The treasures are household items or things that we would see on Earth, which is very charming, and as well as improving the game by removing that time limit, it also added a couple of new Pikmin characters. You had white Pikmin now, which were much swifter than the other types and could also resist poisonous gases, and you had the purple Pikmin, which whilst not having any special abilities were much stronger than the other types and could carry something that would normally take 10 regular Pikmin. The second game also introduced the character of Louis, who was Captain Olimar's assistant, and you could use both characters within the world, separating your team of Pikmin into two to solve more elaborate environmental puzzles. There was also competitive mode. It was separate from the single player main story mode and was more of a challenge mode, but it's there if you want to try it. One last thing, these HD versions also include the pointer controls that were added for the Wii ports of these particular games, something obviously the GameCube version didn't have, owing to not having any sort of gyro functionality. Two fantastic games. Objectively, if I were to pick just one of them, I would probably go for the second, because it does improve on its predecessor, but I do very much have a soft spot for that first game.
As for value, you're looking at £39.99 for the games bundled together, or about £24.99 if you want them individually. It's not cheap, let's be honest, but thankfully there is a physical come-in on September the 22nd, which in this day and age really does hold more value. But there is a lot of game here. Now the first title, as Glen said, has that 30-day limit before you lose. When you bear in mind that each day is 30 minutes long, you're looking at 15 hours for the first title at least, and the sequel removes that entirely while still keeping the 30-minute day. What that means is the combined titles give you around about 30 to 50 hours of gameplay, which is a sizable chunk. I will say though, they do slightly show their age in some of those mechanics, and there are a couple of tedious elements, but on the whole they're still very fun, and the sequel also has a competitive multiplayer mode. So Glen and I have chatted it over, and we do really enjoy these, but yeah, they definitely do show a little bit of age. Still, if you've never played them, they're really enjoyable and you'll have a great time. They get a SwitchUp score of 84%. I hope this has been of some use to you. I hope you have a good time if you're trying them for the first time, and if you enjoy the content, then consider sticking around. As we said at the start, if you want to save a bit of money, do use code SwitchUp over at switchup.gg. That will be 5% off and 5% back, and we get a tiny little kickback from Nintendo. If you want to pick up any physicals, then you can use our Play Asia code. The link's down in the description. And if you like the Joy-Cons, the links for those as well, all in the description. I feel like I'm on a market stall. Either way, as you know, it's just Glen and I on the channel. There's no big company behind us, so your support is massively appreciated, both subscribers and members. And for all things Switch all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys. See ya!